Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire supported by Glenlivet Books. With fear of Omicron growing day by day, and with 8 months having lapsed since the over 60s got their second jab in India, should the government immediately authorize boosters for the aged and the vulnerable? That's the key issue I shall discuss today with the President of the Public Health Foundation of India, Dr. Srinath Reddy. Dr. Reddy, let me start with that simple question. With fear of Omicron growing day by day, and with 8 months having lapsed since the over 60s got their second jab, should the government immediately authorize boosters for the aged and the vulnerable?
Well, I think the fear of Omicron needs to be reassessed first as to how severe it's likely to be in terms of individual vulnerability. Though if it is very infectious, you are still likely to have a fairly large number of people who might get severely ill, even if the fraction of people getting severely ill among the people who are infected may still remain low, which means that there will be people who are in the aged category and therefore are likely to have severe illness in case they are infected. Less so probably than Delta, but nevertheless, the risk remains. Secondly, in terms of people who are likely to have high exposure to the virus, in terms of repetitive viral loads, like healthcare workers who will have to look after a large number of infected persons, they are also likely to see that their risk may be higher, especially if they have waning immunity. They have been vaccinated early in 2021, and therefore their immunity may be waning now. So they too are a high-risk category.
So then are you suggesting that for the elderly and for the high-risk category of health workers, immediate boosters should be authorized?
As soon as feasible.
What does that mean? What does as soon as feasible mean?
It depends on, firstly, what the supply chain situation is, the number of vaccination teams available, and whether they are already overloaded with the task of trying to complete the vaccination for the unvaccinated and the incompletely vaccinated. Ideally, I'd like to see both of them proceed in tandem.
But before you qualify yourself to a point where it's not clear to the audience what you're saying, I want to repeat the question. As soon as feasible, boosters should be given to the elderly and those who are highly exposed to risk.
Yes, I would say as soon as feasible, yes.
Let's investigate further by looking at the data that suggests boosters is essential. A study published last week by Imperial College London says that if you've only had 2 jabs of AstraZeneca, which we call Covishield in India, then protection against serious disease from Omicron is just 18%, and protection against death from Omicron is just 29%. But if boosters are given, it goes up to 80 and 88% respectively. Is that a clinching argument for giving boosters?
Well, if the population is vulnerable and the immunity is at a low ebb, yes. But we do not still know what the situation in India is, because we had our Delta peak between February to June this year, and we have had a lot of vaccination done after that. I think we do need to see what the situation is with respect to Omicron evolving.
But the problem, Dr. Reddy, is but we don't have the data in India to be able to judge this for ourselves. We have to accept that. The government's data is either not made available to the public or it simply doesn't exist. We don't know which, but either way, it's not available. So we can only rely on foreign data, and foreign data clearly shows that protection after 2 jabs of AstraZeneca against serious illness and death falls to 18 and 29%. Separately, studies done in South Africa by Juliet Pulliam show that Omicron is 3 times more likely to lead to reinfection. So once again, previous immunity from infection is not much protection either. So we've reached a situation where neither the jabs we've given nor the seropositivity levels we've established of 68% are going to be really protective. So I come back to my question. We have to rely on foreign data and decide that it's got to be done?
Well, let me answer it in two parts. Firstly, we do not have clear-cut data in India. The situation in India is somewhat different from elsewhere in the world because of the huge Delta wave that we experienced, and we do not know how many people have acquired natural immunity during that period and how many have subsequently had immunity bolstered to some extent by the vaccines. But having said that, I still see two groups of people as being vulnerable. That is the elderly and the healthcare workers who come into regular contact with many people with infections. And in a purely no regrets policy, in the absence of country-specific data, I believe both those groups should be covered at the earliest, depending upon the feasibility of the supply chain and the vaccination teams.
So you're now saying, and I'm repeating it because it's critical, we're talking specifically about the elderly who are vulnerable because of their age and also health line workers who are at the front line of risk. You're saying both of those should be covered at the earliest and as soon as feasible. That is what you're saying in terms of boosters. Would you also include the immunocompromised? Because, by the way, they too haven't got boosters in India at the moment.
No, entirely. I mean, when I say the vulnerable, I do include the immunocompromised because they are the most at risk. Absolutely. The question, of course, is how well are they going to be protected by a booster which has not been very effective in inducing the immunity in the first place? We'll have to wait and see.
But let's take this stage by stage. I'll come to what sort of boosters in a moment's time. First, let's establish with clarity that boosters need to be given. Now, I'm going to put one more data point established by Imperial College in that study that was released last week. They say that if boosters are not given, you could have 5% more deaths than otherwise. Now, we don't know what it amounts to in absolute numbers in India, but given the size of our population, almost 1.4 billion, 5% more deaths than otherwise could be a very large number. So is this a second reason for giving boosters to the elderly, the immunocompromised, and frontline workers?
Well, I believe that given the availability of vaccines, and that is the conditionality, I believe we should proceed on twin tracks, giving high priority to cover the people who have not been fully vaccinated, at the same time providing protection through appropriate boosters to the people who are most vulnerable, the elderly, the immunocompromised, and the health workers.
You're conditioning everything on the availability of vaccines. You said it openly now. Earlier, you meant this when you were talking about as soon as feasible. Let me tell you that the Serum Institute has publicly said that they have 500 million more vaccines, either ready-made or in a position to be made within a month or two. 500 million. Secondly, they are reducing production by 50% hereafter because they are not getting further orders. So Serum alone is guaranteeing sufficient supply of vaccines. That's not a problem anymore. We've had them on record saying it. It's been all over the papers and television.
Yes, but the question is, which vaccine will they supply? Majority of Indians have been vaccinated with Covishield, which, according to all studies abroad, a booster from AstraZeneca type of vaccine for people who have already received 2 of those doses, or even 1 of those doses, doesn't produce adequate immunity, particularly against Omicron. So do we repeat the Covishield vaccine, or do we go in for some other vaccine, which, of course, we do not have a vaccine which is likely to be providing multiple...
Forgive me.
No, but let me complete.
We may have it. Let's not say we don't have it, because you're absolutely right when you say a third jab of AstraZeneca does not really provide ideal protection as a booster. The University of Southampton study, which also came out last week, has established that. But equally, the University of Southampton study establishes that Novavax, which we call Covovax, does provide good immunity. It's a protein vaccine. They've actually done tests, and not laboratory tests, but actual real-world tests to show it's much more efficacious than a third jab of AstraZeneca. But the problem is, although the WHO has cleared Covovax, the European Union has cleared Covovax, our drug regulator seems to be very reluctant to do so. And today's papers, I believe it's the Economic Times, maybe it's the Business Standard, are saying that in fact the drug regulator has asked Serum yet more questions about Covovax. But it's been cleared by the European Union, it's been cleared by WHO, and Indonesia has been giving it. 50 million were given there. So we clearly have enough. And again, Serum Institute went on record in June to say that they could make 200 million doses available of Covovax by December.
Well, I was about to complete my sentence by saying that I would rather go in for the subunit protein vaccines like Covovax, or the vaccine that is being produced but yet to be completely approved by Biological E, which is also a subunit protein vaccine. I believe even these are relatively spike protein specific, but the fact that they do produce a fair amount of immune response against the spike protein may overwhelm even the spike protein mutations. And if that is the objective, as in the mRNA vaccines, we ought to use these subunit vaccines or the protein vaccines.
But we're not.
And
But sir, well, the point is we have the vaccines. There's, as you said, biologically, we don't know if it's been cleared. Is it? In fact, it hasn't. But we do have Zycov-D, which has been cleared, but it hasn't really gone into use. We've got Covaxin, which probably is not producing enough quantity, but it's there. And we know we have from Serum 200 million doses of Covovax. Now, the issue you raised of feasibility in terms of supply no longer exists, therefore. What does exist is a certain reluctance and hesitation on the part of the government.
I'm not privy to government policy, but all I can say is that since boosters for some of the vulnerable groups are advisable, definitely advisable from a no regrets policy, even in the face of lack of data and a fair amount of uncertainty about how serious the situation is going to be in India. Nevertheless, I believe those who are most vulnerable because of age, immunocompromised state, or repetitive exposure to high viral loads ought to receive the protection from boosters at the earliest possible opportunity.
Absolutely, sir. And I'm just going to sum up the point we've reached because I think it's important for the audience to have clarity. You believe at the earliest possible opportunity, the elderly and the vulnerable should be given it. Only concern you have is feasibility. The principal element of feasibility is supply of vaccines. Serum Institute went on record in June to say that they would have 200 million doses of Covovax available. The University of Southampton has done studies that show that Covovax is much better than a third jab of AstraZeneca. Covovax has been cleared by the World Health Organization and the European Union. It's been given in Indonesia. It's available in India. So feasibility in terms of supply is not a concern. The only possible feasibility is, do we have enough people to give jabs, which clearly we do. We clearly do. Shortage of people giving jabs is not a problem. The real problem is the attitude of the government of India and their experts who do not seem to want to come to a clear conclusion. And let me put this to you, because I think it's very important. The government's position remains that they must vaccinate fully every adult before they embark on boosters. It's not just their practical position, I think it's also their moral position, and I'm not criticizing the position. What I'm going to do is quote in contrast to that, the study from Imperial College. Here's a direct quotation. Targeting boosters to the highest risk groups to ensure continued high protection in the face of waning immunity is of greater benefit than giving these doses as primary vaccination to younger age groups. So Imperial College is clearly saying to the government, your policy of first fully vaccinating everyone before giving boosters is the wrong approach at this moment of time. How do you respond to that? It's a clear clash of opinions between GOI and Imperial College.
I would agree that younger people who are not yet vaccinated are less of a priority than older age groups who are not yet vaccinated or are incompletely vaccinated. And indeed, if Omicron is the main threat, then the threat is likely to be lower even compared to Delta in the younger age group. Therefore, for me, the priority would be completing the vaccination among the people who are still vulnerable because of their age or otherwise comorbidities, and ensure that they get the full double dose while proceeding at the same time on a twin track of providing boosters to those who need them.
But can I interrupt there? This is not such an exceptional thing that you're saying. Every country in the world that is giving boosters is going on a twin track as well. Because, you know, America has not fully vaccinated every adult. Even Britain hasn't, although they've got very close to it, but they're still at about 75%. They're not discontinuing giving second jabs, but they're at the same time giving boosters as well to those who've had 2 jabs. It's not an either or. Why on earth does the government of India have to think of it as either or? Why can't we do both together?
Well, that is what I believe it would be the correct policy, but I cannot really speak on behalf of the government of India.
I'm not asking you to speak on behalf of government of India. I know you can't speak on their behalf. I'm asking you to speak as president of the Public Health Foundation. Your view as head of the Public Health Foundation will carry a lot of weight. If you were to say today that they must immediately start giving vaccine boosters to the aged and the vulnerable, and the excuse that they don't have enough supply must be put aside, and the excuse they don't have enough people must be put aside, you will create public opinion in favor of it. But you've got to be outspoken and clear, sir.
Well, I'm being outspoken and clear by saying that based on whatever is the supply side situation that they can actually engage with, they ought to prioritize giving boosters to those who are immunocompromised, elderly, and a high of repetitive exposure, and carry on at the same time completing the double dose vaccination for the rest of the adult population.
Absolutely. And I'll just lay aside that concern about the supply side situation by pointing out that in June, we were told by Serum they have 200 million doses available by December of Covovax, and it's being sold already to Indonesia. Made in India, sold in Indonesia, needed in India, but not used in India. What a peculiar paradox. But let me put something else to you, sir. It's not just European countries, North American countries, Israel and Japan, i.e. the rich part of the world, that are giving boosters. So is South Africa. They authorized boosters in their country a month ago. So is next door Pakistan. And in fact, 4 days ago, Pakistan has now made boosters available to everyone over 30. Isn't it surprising that India, the world's biggest manufacturer of vaccines, something we're so proud of, with no shortage of supply, whether it's a third jab of AstraZeneca or whether it's Covovax, yet the government can't seem to decide about giving boosters. I mean, it's another paradox, isn't it? We make more vaccines than anyone else. We've got them sitting in the shelves at the Serum Institute. We're not giving it to people who need it.
Well, I'm sure the debate is going on in the group of experts who are advising the government. I believe some of them are taking the position that we must complete the adult vaccination before we turn to boosters, and that the overall benefits are likely to be higher by adopting that strategy.
And what would the benefits be? What would the benefits be? You're already hitting levels of vaccine hesitancy because 90% of the adult population have got 1 jab. So that's when vaccine hesitancy starts coming in. Pretty close to 60% of the population, adult, have got 2 jabs. Boosting it further will be much more difficult than the initial stages. We know that. That's not rocket science. So what's there to debate about at such length? Meanwhile, you're leaving the aged and the vulnerable at risk. We know it from the research done by the Imperial College.
I am not saying that we should follow only a one-track policy. I am advocating a twin-track policy of ensuring that we complete the double dose vaccination, but at the same time prioritizing those who need the boosters and starting that as early as possible.
Can I point something else out, just in case the audience gets the mistaken impression from our discussion, that all the papers have reported today, a report or study released by AstraZeneca and Oxford University themselves yesterday, and they claim, and they are the makers of the vaccine, so bear that in mind, but they claim that a third jab of AstraZeneca works very well as a booster against Omicron. They are, in a sense, contradicting the University of Southampton, but nonetheless, they are claiming that it does work well. So even if you don't want to use Novavax, you have a third jab of AstraZeneca available. But let's move on beyond this question of which vaccine and the question of do we have enough supply. You do believe that the government needs to also redouble its efforts to ensure that people who are immunocompromised, to ensure that people who are vulnerable because of their age get fully vaccinated. Professor Rijo John tells us that 34% of people over 60 haven't got a second jab, 31% of people over 45. You believe that one of the tracks has to be to make sure these people are very rapidly jabbed.
Absolutely. There's no doubt about that.
But it's not a major concern as far as the government is concerned because they don't talk about it.
No, I think attempts are being made to try and get the vaccination completed as much as possible, particularly the double dose vaccination for the people who are elderly.
The worst part is that the rate of vaccination on a weekly basis is not rising, it's actually declining. The Hindu seems to publish it fairly regularly, and you'll see that for the last week that they have, it's not very high.
Well, we need to revisit the strategy of how to actually ensure that those who are not vaccinated are both reached and persuaded.
This is the point I'm making. Because your rate of vaccination is not rising at the speed it should, because you're hitting levels of vaccine hesitancy when you have 90% already getting one jab, that's the point at which, although you need a twin track approach, but you perhaps need to put more emphasis on giving boosters to the aged and the vulnerable. God forbid Omicron starts to spread the way it is in Europe, and we're not an exceptional country, we're not unique, so it's bound to happen. These people will be unprotected. And entirely because the government of India couldn't make up its mind, entirely because its so-called scientific experts were debating, as if this is a platonic subject that you need to sit around for Socratic wisdom to dawn on you. The rest of the world has got the science, they've got the studies, we're ignoring it. We don't have data of our own to go by, so we're going to carry on debating. And at risk are people who are aged and vulnerable.
Well, as I said, we do need the twin track approach, and we need to ensure that both the tracks are functioning well. We cannot really let the incompletely vaccinated alone while we focus on the boosters. At the same time, we should not delay getting the boosters.
Sir, it's not an either or. You keep making it seem either or. Is government of India capable of doing two things together at the same time?
I'm not saying
it seems to be they are.
No, I'm very clearly saying that we need a twin track approach.
Okay, let me raise two more issues before I end. With Omicron staring us in the face, should the government reduce the gap between two doses of Covishield? It's presently between 12 and 16 weeks. Should it be brought down to 8, which is what Britain did several months ago?
Well, it's interesting that I heard your conversation with Dr. Shahid Jamil, and he said 8 to 12 weeks. Which is where I took a position some months ago. But then the government said 12 to 16 weeks is fine. And there are several very experienced and qualified virologists who have said that 12 to 16 weeks is absolutely the fine thing to do. So that's a difference of opinion among experts.
What is your opinion? What is your opinion?
My opinion is still 8 to 12 weeks.
So in other words, the government should reduce it to 8 to 12 weeks.
Well, they should consider it, certainly, but then...
Let's not, you have to give me a straight answer. If it's your opinion, state it's your opinion and say they should reduce it to 8 to 12 weeks.
My opinion remains the same, 8 to 12 weeks.
So your advice to the government as president of the Public Health Foundation is reduce the gap to 8 to 12 weeks.
My advice to the government is that this would be ideal, but please be guided by whatever your experts are saying. after a good discussion of all the evidence.
All right. You're not giving me a clear answer about your own opinion, but never mind. My last
No,
question,
I cannot.
what about
I'll
vaccines?
speak for myself. I can't speak on behalf of all the experts.
Obviously, sir, I know you can't. You can't speak on behalf of anyone but yourself, but it's only your opinion I'm asking. I'm talking to you and not to the other experts. It's your opinion I want.
No, my opinion remains the same, 8 to 12 weeks. And I'm glad to see that Dr. Shahid Jamil also has said the same thing.
Absolutely. And his opinion earlier, if I recall correctly, was 16 may be right. He's now come around to saying that in the face of Omicron, reduce it because, although he didn't say it, I assume his belief is you need to vaccinate people fully as quickly as possible, shorten the gap and hasten the process.
I do not differ with him. I'm glad that we are on the same page.
My last issue, what about vaccination for children? Is it a priority at the moment? Or unlike European countries and America, can we afford to put that slightly on the back burner?
I believe right now there is no looming threat for children because even with Delta, they've not had such a severe infection in terms of illness. And with Omicron, the danger is likely to be less compared to Delta 2. So I do not believe that they come immediately under the priority group, even though I would very much want the schools and colleges to function. And I believe vaccinating adults is the first priority, even to protect the children. But at some stage in 2022, which is not too far away, I believe children also would need to be vaccinated. And perhaps by then, we'll have better vaccines which are not purely spike protein specific. Now, there are vaccines which are coming up, which are probably going to be multi-antigen or even against multiple coronaviruses. So perhaps in 2022, we may see children getting the benefit of even better vaccines. Okay. But right now, they are not the priority group.
That's very clear. Right now, it's not the priority. It's not a decision the government needs to urgently take. This is one issue.
Unless they're immunocompromised.
Obviously, anyone who's immunocompromised, you need to protect, and that's a first priority. Absolutely. But unless children are not immunocompromised, for the vast majority who won't be, it's not an urgent decision. The government can think about this more carefully. If need be, wait for later generation vaccines, which may be more suitable. It's not an urgent issue. So I end then by simply repeating what we have, I think, established, that you believe that for the aged and the vulnerable, a decision to give boosters needs to be taken at the earliest and as soon as feasible. Your concerns about feasibility are twofold. They are to do with supply of vaccine, which actually we should have more than enough of, even if you only give AstraZeneca as a third jab, or if you want to go for Covovax. And the other concern about feasibility is, do we have enough people so that we can carry on a twin track approach of vaccinating those who are still not fully vaccinated, as well as giving boosters to those who need it. I do believe the government should be able to do both together. Every other country in the world is doing both together. It would be an awful admission of our incompetence if we become the only country that can't. And I want to remind the audience, South Africa, a country in a very similar situation to us, has been giving boosters to everyone for a month. Pakistan has been giving it, and as of 3-4 days ago, it's even giving it to people over 30. We really need to ask ourselves the question, do we want to be exceptional in this regard and hold back doing so? I thank you for this interview, Dr. Reddy. Many thanks indeed. Take care, stay safe.
And wish you and the viewers a very happy new year.
Yes, indeed, sir. Merry Christmas as well.
Merry Christmas as well, of course.
Right. And Happy New Year.